The door slid open, and there stood the alien officer, a towering figure, with eyes glowing faintly under the metallic plating of their uniform. They didn't just walk into the room, they loomed. Their presence was like an unwelcome gust of wind, unmistakable, overwhelming, and utterly devoid of humor. Every inch of them screamed superior, from their chiseled features to the taut, perfect muscles beneath the armor. The diplomat was slouched in a chair at the center of the room, legs propped up, casual, completely unconcerned by the imposing alien. His hand rested lazily on his lap. He dressed in a simple, stylish human shirt, crisp and perhaps a bit too tight around the chest to highlight his physicality. But the alien officer didn't care about any of that. No, what really drew their attention was the bulge. It wasn't subtle. In fact, it was downright conspicuous, a perplexing anomaly in the midst of the diplomat's otherwise nonchalant posture. The officer couldn't help but blink, focusing in on the strange, lumpy outline beneath the fabric. The bulge had an almost strategic presence, pushing out, as if to declare itself a threat, or perhaps a weapon. Was it a form of human self-defense? Some kind of primitive artifact they wore for protection? The officer's mouth parted slightly, an involuntary movement, as they tried to suppress the overwhelming confusion building in their mind. Their race didn't have such distractions. Their bodies were perfectly engineered, devoid of anything that could be so obvious. Not that it would matter in the long run. They were here to assess the humans, rational, superior beings like themselves, and make a decision. But this was strange. This wasn't logic. Is there a problem? The diplomat asked, not looking up from his data pad, his voice thick with amusement. The alien officer froze, caught mid-thought, unsure of how to respond. The question was simple, but its timing couldn't have been more loaded. The human's face remained neutral, almost amused, but his legs? They seemed to stretch out, casually, unconcerned by the officer's evident discomfort. The bulge was the issue. The officer began, their voice stiff with tension. Your anatomy, what is that? The diplomat glanced up, his expression a playful smirk, as though the question were a little too obvious. What this? He gestured vaguely to his lap, his tone dripping with sarcasm. It's just a bulge. The officers stared, their mind whirring. A bulge? They repeated. But why does it protrude like that? Is it dangerous? The diplomat finished for them, a smile tugging at his lips. Not really, unless you're a fan of over-exaggerated human emotions. The alien officer was now visibly flustered. They had read reports on human physiology. Hell, they'd even studied it for this exact purpose. But nothing had prepared them for this. It's not a weapon, then? No, the diplomat chuckled. But it is a representation of something important. The officer blinked, their confusion deepening. They had expected arrogance from the human delegation, but not this. What exactly does it represent? The diplomat leaned back in his chair, shifting slightly to draw more attention to his position, his legs still outstretched. It represents humanity's greatest asset. Confidence. He emphasized the word with a sharp, almost theatrical tone, as if it were a grand reveal. The officer blinked again, unsure of whether to laugh or grow more concerned. Confidence. The word seemed so simple, so lacking in depth, yet so heavy in this context. And that bulge, as ridiculous as it seemed, was meant to symbolize this? How strange. How absurd. Yes, confidence, the diplomat repeated, as if reading the officer's thoughts. You see, for humans, confidence is a weapon in itself. Not the kind you expect. We don't conquer with lasers or warships alone. Sometimes we just show up. He let the words linger in the air. Take a look. That bulge isn't just an aesthetic choice, officer. It's a statement. The officer tried to gather their thoughts. Surely this was a joke, some form of human mockery? Yet the diplomat's tone remained serious, laced with subtle amusement. Still, the officer pressed forward, trying to regain control of the conversation. And this statement, it is not offensive? The diplomat grinned, leaning forward now, his posture relaxed but intentionally provocative. "Oh, it's only offensive if you don't understand it." At that moment, the officer caught the diplomat's eyes. Laughter danced within them. And something else. Something unsettling. There was playfulness there. The kind of playfulness that suggested the human wasn't just making a point. He was enjoying this. All of it. There was a long silence as the officer, trying not to react, glanced down again. The bulge was still there, impossible to ignore, as if daring them to understand it. The officer cleared their throat, steeling themselves, and tried to redirect the conversation. "If confidence is so valuable, why do you choose to display it so blatantly?" "Why not?" the diplomat shot back. "Humans don't hide their strengths. Ever. If we want to show confidence, we show it. We don't need a reason." He paused, his voice lowering to a teasing tone. "And trust me, officer, there's plenty of reason to be confident." The alien officer's posture stiffened again. This human was insufferable, and yet, undeniably, charming? They didn't know whether they were more confused or intrigued by the human's audacity. But as their eyes briefly flickered back to the bulge, they couldn't help but notice how much attention it was demanding. How could such a simple thing, this anomaly, be so captivating? "No need to apologize," the diplomat added casually, still holding the officer's gaze. "It's not dangerous. It's just human." Human. The officer was beginning to grasp that this was more than a simple diplomatic exchange, it was an entirely new experience. And this human, this representative of humanity, was certainly no typical delegate. They were unpredictable, irreverent, and the bulge seemed to be at the heart of it all. Before the officer could formulate another question, the diplomat leaned back, his legs crossed casually at the ankles, as though the answer were already in their grasp. "That," he said with a sly grin, "is the first thing you need to understand about us. We never do anything without a reason, even when it looks like we don't." The alien officer, feeling utterly lost in the conversation, could only nod, though internally, their thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and curiosity. The bulge. The confidence. Was there really no hidden agenda? Were humans really this direct? As they stared at the diplomat, the officer couldn't help but wonder, what other surprises did humanity have in store? And perhaps more importantly, could this thing, this bulge, truly be the key to understanding them? But of course, they couldn't ask that outright. Instead, the officer's mind raced, analyzing the data on this human, and on his increasingly frustrating yet fascinating, undeniable charm. The air in the room felt thicker now, almost crackling with tension as the alien officer stood, a few paces away from the human diplomat. It wasn't just the awkwardness of the bulge, or the strange human custom of directness. No, there was something deeper, something about this human that was increasingly off-putting. The officer had been trained for these sorts of diplomatic encounters. They had dealt with countless species across the galaxy. But this was new. The diplomat, still lounging with his legs crossed and hands behind his head, seemed to sense the officer's growing discomfort. He smiled, sharp as a knife. "So you don't get it yet, huh?" The officer didn't respond immediately. They didn't want to respond. Every part of their being urged them to fall back on the logical assessments they'd been trained to trust. Yet something about this human made it impossible to keep that calm, calculated exterior. The way the diplomat kept leaning back, stretching out his legs, making no effort to hide the bulge that had the officer so distracted, it wasn't just confidence. It was something else. Something unnerving. "You still think it's a weapon?" the diplomat said, his voice dripping with amusement. "Isn't it cute how you're still trying to figure me out?" The officer snapped back, forcing their posture to remain rigid. "I don't believe it's a weapon. I believe it's an anomaly. A malfunction, perhaps. A defect in human design." The diplomat let out a light laugh, too loud for the officer's comfort. "A defect, huh?" He gave a little smirk. "I can see how you'd think that. But no, officer. You've got it all wrong." The officer's gaze flickered back down to the bulge, then up to the diplomat's face. There was something about the way the human was talking, something about the way he was playing with the officer's confusion. It didn't sit right. Then what exactly is it? The diplomat stretched out even further in his seat, throwing a playful wink. It's just humanity's biggest advantage. It's a statement of strength, pure and simple. You see, we don't need to hide what we are. We're open. Honest. And that, he gestured toward himself, is how we survive. The alien officer stared, still uncomprehending. The human's words made no sense, no logical sense at all. But the way he said them, so confidently, so assuredly, it was beginning to crack the officer's defenses. You're saying that your physicality is a strength? The officer tried to clarify, though their voice betrayed a trace of doubt. That's your advantage? A bulge? The diplomat's lips quirked into a sly grin. Not just the bulge. It's what the bulge represents. It's about not hiding anything. Ever. He leaned forward, shifting in his seat in a way that emphasized his posture. It's about being able to make people feel uncomfortable, and owning it. The officer took a step back, trying to process the diplomat's words. This human wasn't just confident, they were cocky. And they were using everything they had to unnerve the officer. You think that's how you win, then? By making others uncomfortable? The diplomat chuckled again, his tone dripping with a mix of amusement and superiority. Not just uncomfortable. Unpredictable. You see, officer, we humans don't play by your rules. Or anyone's rules, for that matter. We break them, twist them, do whatever we need to do to get things done. The officer's eyes narrowed. This was starting to make sense in a way they hadn't expected. They'd seen humans like this before, ruthless in their unpredictability. But it wasn't supposed to be this kind of encounter. It wasn't supposed to be this personal. So you're saying that your approach to diplomacy is based on making others feel unsettled? Exactly, the diplomat said, sitting up straight now, his tone more serious than before. Sometimes you don't need to do anything big to make an impression. Sometimes it's just a little show of strength. The officer clenched their fists, resisting the urge to shout at the human. This wasn't supposed to be a test of mental will. This wasn't supposed to be about power plays. But the human was relentless, every word, every gesture, making it harder and harder for the officer to keep their cool. And that, the officer said slowly, is how you intend to secure humanity's place in the Galactic Council? The diplomat's grin widened, but there was something else in his eyes now. Something dangerous. Oh, you'll see. We might not have the strongest armies, the most advanced tech. But we've got the biggest personality. That's what gets us through. And that, he pointed directly at his lap with a mischievous glint. That's the key to winning. The officer blinked. For a moment, it was as though the entire galaxy had shifted on its axis. Could this really be what humans use to survive? Their personality? Their ability to throw everything off balance? The officer's head spun. There had to be more to this than just arrogance. Is this really how your species works? The officer asked, voice low, unsure. Your success is rooted in this audacity? The diplomat leaned back again, placing his hands behind his head, as though he had just delivered a masterstroke in some grand game. It's not audacity. It's humanity. We don't follow your rules, officer. We break them and make our own. And that's how we win. The alien officer's mind reeled. This wasn't what they had been prepared for. They had expected cunning, manipulation, strategy, but this was something completely different. And as much as it rattled their sense of order, something about it, something about him, was starting to make sense. You humans are unpredictable, the officer muttered under their breath, as much to themselves as to the diplomat. I see now why your species is difficult to categorize. The diplomat's smile deepened, but it was tinged with something more dangerous now. Yeah, that's the idea, he said, his tone a mix of challenge and invitation. We're unpredictable. And that, officer, is exactly why you should never underestimate us. The officer didn't reply immediately. They just stood there, silently processing the diplomat's words, the bulge still lingering in their mind, almost as a symbol of everything that was wrong, and everything that was right about humanity's approach. Confidence. Boldness, the officer muttered, starting to grasp it, though still unsure whether they truly understood the depth of what had just been shared. Is that your secret weapon? The diplomat's eyes sparkled. Not a secret. Just human nature. He gave a final, casual wink. And you're starting to catch on. The officer exhaled slowly, both frustrated and intrigued by this entire exchange. It wasn't going how they had expected, no. But maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what made it so dangerous. The silence between them thickened as the alien officer processed the human's words. It was like being caught in a whirlpool of confusion, each new revelation pulling them deeper into the strange dynamics of this interaction. The officer had expected a straightforward meeting, something clinical, logical. But this was far from logical. And the more they tried to anchor themselves in their training, the more the diplomat's casual confidence unraveled their understanding of the situation. The officer stood motionless, their thoughts swirling. The bulge, the unrelenting arrogance, the way the humans seemed to revel in making them uncomfortable, it was maddening. And yet, somewhere deep inside, the officer felt a peculiar flicker. A strange curiosity. Were humans really this reckless? This unpredictable? So, this is your diplomatic strategy, is it? The officer's voice came out sharper than they intended, but it was too late to retract it. To unsettle your counterparts, to undermine them with your presence? The diplomat chuckled softly, clearly unfazed by the officer's tone. Not just presence. It's about disruption, officer. Every time we're forced to play by someone else's rules, we flip the script. We throw a wrench in their gears. And it works. He leaned forward again, as if the moment required a more personal touch. You see, your species, you like everything neat and orderly, don't you? You like things predictable, controlled. Well, humans? We thrive on chaos. We've learned how to make it work in our favor. The officer's jaw tightened. There was an edge to the human's words, something that seemed almost dangerous. That's reckless. Reckless? The diplomat raised an eyebrow. Maybe. But it's also what makes us strong. Humans don't follow your rules, officer. We bend them, break them, reshape them to fit our needs. He paused, watching the officer carefully. And when we do that, we get things done. We survive. The officer frowned, narrowing their gaze. It was maddening. This human seemed to speak with an air of complete certainty, as though everything they did, no matter how illogical or imprudent, was the result of a deep, unshakable truth. Is that why you think you deserve to be part of the Galactic Council? Because you disrupt things? The diplomat's lips curled into a sly smile. Not just because we disrupt things. Because we win by doing it. And we make our enemies respect us. We make them question everything they think they know about power and control. The officer felt a surge of frustration, and yet, beneath that frustration, something else. A spark of admiration? Was that possible? They had never encountered a species quite like this, one that approached diplomacy with such a wild, unpredictable energy. The officer had always been the one in control, the one who understood how to wield power. But this human, this diplomat was turning everything upside down. You're saying this, the officer said slowly, choosing each word carefully, is how humanity wins? Through chaos? The diplomat leaned back in his chair, eyes twinkling with mischief. Yeah, exactly. And it's not just physical strength or cunning. It's psychological warfare. A game of wits. You see, while your species relies on precision, on order, we thrive on making the unexpected our greatest weapon. And you have to admit, he said, his voice lowering to almost a whisper. It's working, isn't it? The officer's mind raced. Is it working? The human was right about one thing: they were thoroughly disrupted. They had come here with a single purpose: assess humanity, determine whether they were worthy of joining the Galactic Council. But this human, this insufferable, arrogant, and strangely captivating diplomat, was making that task impossible. Every time the officer thought they were gaining some ground, the human tossed another wrench into the gears. The officer exhaled slowly, struggling to maintain their composure. "Your species is difficult to understand," they admitted, the words tasting strange on their tongue. "You think that by disrupting everything around you, you can control the outcome?" The diplomat laughed again, but this time, it wasn't mocking. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that made the officer pause. "Control? No. But we sure as hell make sure our enemies have no idea what to expect. And when they don't know what's coming, that's when we can make our move." There was something in the diplomat's eyes now, something that flickered with more than just arrogance. A glint of respect, perhaps? Or something deeper? The officer couldn't decide. But whatever it was, it unsettled them. "And the Bulge?" the officer said, voice tight, trying to get back on track. "That representation of confidence, as you call it, does that, too, play a role in your strategy?" The diplomat didn't flinch. He merely gave a short, sardonic chuckle. "The Bulge, officer? That's just one part of the package. It's about creating an aura, a presence. It's a statement that says I'm in control, I'm not afraid to show it, and you have no idea what I'm capable of. It's all about projection." "Projection?" The officer's mind whirred, trying to analyze the human's words, trying to put them into a framework they could understand. "You're telling me that your entire species, your way of surviving and thriving, is based on the ability to project an image of confidence?" The diplomat raised an eyebrow, as if the answer should have been obvious. "Exactly. The best part? It works every time. People believe it. They buy into the show. And by the time they realize it's a game, we've already won." The officer blinked, astonished by the sheer audacity of the claim. "That's your secret? A game? Yep. And that's why we've made it this far. While others sit there, analyzing everything to death, we're out there, having a little fun. And somehow, it gets the job done." The officer wanted to protest, to point out the flaws in the human logic. But they couldn't. This human, this diplomat, was making more sense than they wanted to admit. The boldness, the unpredictability, the refusal to play by anyone else's rules, it was maddening, yes. But it was also effective. And there was something about the way the diplomat spoke, so assuredly, so confidently, that made the officer question their own beliefs. The human leaned forward again, locking eyes with the officer. "You'll see, officer. This is how humanity wins. We don't always follow the rules, but we sure as hell know how to use them when we need to. And when you're up against us, that's when things get interesting." The officer swallowed hard, the words sinking in deeper than they expected. They couldn't deny it. This human was onto something. Humanity didn't play by the same rules as the Galactic Council. They didn't need to. They had their own brand of chaos, and that was enough. "I'm beginning to see that," the officer muttered, more to themselves than to the diplomat. The human smiled again, almost too knowingly. "Good. Now let's see if you're ready to make your move." The officer's heart pounded in their chest. They weren't sure what they'd gotten themselves into, but one thing was for certain. The diplomat's strange, chaotic brand of diplomacy had just turned the tables. And they weren't about to back down now. The diplomat's smirk never wavered, and the officer could feel the weight of his gaze as it settled uncomfortably on them. This was no longer just a diplomatic meeting. It had evolved into something far more intricate, something that challenged everything the officer had been taught to believe. Every instinct screamed to maintain control, to rely on strategy, logic, and the cold precision their species had perfected over millennia. Yet, this human, this frustrating, infuriating human, was making that almost impossible. "Are you ready to make your move, officer?" The diplomat's voice sliced through the officer's thoughts, his words carrying more weight than they should have. The officer's grip on their composure tightened. I don't know what you're talking about." The words felt hollow, even to the officer's ears. The truth was, they didn't know what the diplomat meant. The human had successfully flipped their entire worldview on its head. This wasn't a simple negotiation. This wasn't about control or domination. This was about something far more chaotic, and somehow more human. Come on, the diplomat teased, leaning forward, eyes glinting with a devilish light. You've been analyzing everything, overthinking every word. But sometimes, officer, the simplest answer is the right one. It's about understanding how we humans operate. You don't need to break everything down. You just need to let go. The officer's mind struggled to grasp the implications of the diplomat's words. The very notion of letting go felt like anathema. It went against every principle of their species code. The officer wasn't supposed to let go, they were supposed to be in command, in control at all times. But this human, this irreverent, undisciplined human, was challenging everything. Let go? The officer's voice was strained, a mix of incredulity and frustration. How can I just let go of everything I've been trained to believe in? The diplomat's smile only widened, almost pitying, as though they'd been expecting this reaction. You're so caught up in your own rules, officer. But humanity? We've learned that sometimes the most unpredictable outcomes come from letting go of control. You can't plan everything. You can't control everything. But you can adapt. The officers shook their head, their minds still reeling. They couldn't admit it, but the diplomat's words were beginning to make sense, and it infuriated them. So, you're saying that not controlling everything is your way of winning? The diplomat chuckled, leaning back as though the answer should have been obvious. Exactly. It's not about winning at all costs. It's about making sure we're always in the game. By the time anyone figures out our next move, we've already shifted again. We move fast, we're unpredictable, and we know how to keep everyone guessing. That's the true strength of humanity. The officers' hands clenched at their sides, the irritation rising in their chest. And this is how you plan to convince the Galactic Council to accept your species? The words came out with more bite than they'd intended. But it didn't matter anymore. The diplomat had already dismantled the officer's carefully constructed worldview. The human's grin didn't falter, but there was a gleam in his eye now, something that bordered on admiration. Oh, you'll see. You'll see exactly how we do it. It's not about making everyone agree with us. It's about making them respect us. We might not always play nice, but we know how to get things done. And that's why we're still here. The officer's mind spun. The more the diplomat spoke, the more the officer felt as though the ground beneath them was shifting. What was happening? The officer had never been so close to losing control of the situation. This wasn't supposed to happen. They were supposed to be the ones who had the upper hand. But this human, with his cocky confidence, his irreverent attitude, and his bulge, this human had turned the tables. Do you really think that your species can survive on this? The officer's voice dropped to a whisper, still struggling to comprehend the diplomat's unorthodox methods. The diplomat chuckled darkly. Not just survive. We thrive. We make people underestimate us, and then, when they do, we strike. Humanity has always been the underdog. Always the ones who come out of nowhere and shock the galaxy. And that's exactly why we make a hell of an impression. The officer was silent for a long moment. Could it really be that simple? Was humanity really this chaotic, this powerful in its unpredictability? It went against everything the officer had believed in. But what the diplomat said, there was truth in it. The human's ability to constantly shift, to adapt, to never follow the same pattern twice. It was both maddening and strangely admirable. The officer found themselves at a crossroads. Could they really accept this? Could they accept that this species, this human, wasn't just a loose cannon, but a force to be reckoned with? Something deep inside the officer told them that this was the very reason humanity was worthy of a place in the Galactic Council. Not because they were the strongest, not because they had the most advanced weapons, but because they were unpredictable. Because they could adapt faster than anyone else, and that made them dangerous. And you think, the officer began, their voice quieter now, that this is enough to convince the council? To convince them that humanity is worth the risk? The diplomat's smile softened, but only slightly. I don't think it's enough. I know it is. The Council? They're full of species who've been sitting around for millennia, doing the same old thing, following the same rules. But humanity? We don't follow the rules. We rewrite them. And by the time the Council realizes what we're really capable of, it'll be too late. The officer felt a chill run down their spine. The human was right, in a way. Humanity was different from all the other species the officer had encountered. There was something untamed, something wild about them. And that unpredictability was what made them dangerous. The officer finally allowed themselves to exhale, the tension in their shoulders easing ever so slightly. So, you're saying that humanity's greatest strength is its unpredictability? The diplomat's gaze was steady, and for the first time, the officer saw a flicker of something else, something almost respectful in his eyes. Exactly. We might not have all the answers, officer. But we've got something no one else has, the ability to think outside the box. We've survived against all odds because we've never let anything, not even the rules, hold us back. The officer swallowed hard. I think I understand. The diplomat's smile widened, now a knowing grin, as though the battle had already been won. Yeah. You get it. And that's why, officer, humanity is going to change the galaxy. Whether they like it or not. The officer stood frozen, their minds still whirring with the implications of everything that had just transpired. The human's words, bold, irreverent, and strangely compelling, had shattered their carefully constructed beliefs. And for the first time in their life, the officer wasn't sure what came next. But one thing was clear: humanity, with its chaotic, unpredictable nature, was not just a force to be reckoned with, it was a force that was about to reshape the galaxy. And somehow, the officer couldn't help but feel a strange sense of excitement.